Your reflections on where we are 12 months on.
It's been astonishing to see the resilience of Ukraine and, to some degree, the unity of the West to stand up and support. But moving into this second year, sanctions are having an impact, but are not deterring Russia or Putin from moving forward. He is resolute in dragging this out. He is indeed raising the stakes as well. So 2023 will be a critical year. We need to increase our resolve to provide greater military assistance, including air power, and recognizing that the stakes are getting higher with the potential of China now providing some form of assistance to Russia as well. So we need to rekindle our Cold War statecraft and make sure that we actually can conclude this in 2023. Otherwise, it has every chance of spreading way beyond Ukraine.
It's interesting you mentioned China. We've done an interview with John Bolton, who makes a very, very similar point and says that there is a danger that if this isn't sort of wrapped up in the next year, this could go on for a long time and really change geopolitics. Do you agree with that?
I do. It's something I've been saying for a little while now. This is not just about Ukraine. This is about us moving into a new era of insecurity where we've not done enough to back up our way of life, our international rules-based order. I mean, just step back and look at the United Nations Security Council. When you have one member of that council, permanent member, invade another state, and another permanent member, China, not condemn that, and then three other permanent members, France, Britain, and the United States, not working totally together to put this fire out, our world is in trouble.
And that's a really interesting point. We spoke to a former ambassador to Ukraine who also made the point that Russia is doing quite a lot of sort of effective kind of subversive diplomacy, and lots of global south countries are sort of quite sympathetic to Russia. They're certainly abstaining some of these big votes. I mean, how does the West try and shore those countries up and send a signal to them that, Russia is no friend of theirs?
You're absolutely right to point that out. It means the status quo is not good enough. It's not working when there are so many on the sidelines, big countries, India, for example,
Yeah.
Mexico, of all countries, for example, Brazil, South Africa. When these countries choose not to join in with sanctions, indeed, only 34 nations across the world are actually joined in with those sanctions. It shows that authoritarianism across the world is allowed to grow, that democracies are actually in the minority. And that's why it's important to recognize perhaps how complacent we've become since the last Cold War, what we need to do to inject greater energy and resolve to defend what is important to us. And that means putting this fire out in Ukraine. It's taken us a year just to start thinking about getting tanks, getting heavy weapons to Ukraine. This should have happened months ago. We've been too risk averse, and that's been exploited by our adversaries.
And what do you think needs to happen next then? We've done this much. You have said before that, tanks aren't enough. I mean, interestingly, one remembers your exchange with Boris Johnson actually very well at that liaison committee where you made the argument about tanks. Actually, Boris Johnson said, we don't really live in a world where tanks are really the thing anymore. But now it's, tanks are not enough and we need to move to the next phase. What do you think that phase is? Is it, F-16 jets? Is it helicopters? What do you think that is?
Well, you're talking about military assistance, and this is tactical. Tactical assistance has to have a purpose. It has to be part of a strategy. So let's begin by confirming what success looks like, what victory looks like. To me, that is the liberation of Donbass, followed by Crimea, allowing Ukraine to become a sovereign nation again. Anything less than that, and Putin will take away a success. It means that Ukraine will not be able to expand and advance and prosper as an economy because Russia will own part of it, and then simply pause, regroup, do it all again in a couple of years' time. That is now the bandwidth in which it operates on. We need to stand up to that. So it's not just military assistance; it's also thinking more strategically, getting that port of Odessa open. The reason why we have a cost of living crisis here in this country is because the grain isn't getting out. Oil and gas is not, it's gone up as well. So we are directly linked. It's in our interests to support Ukraine. So we have our own defense posture that needs to be considered as well. That exchange I had with the Prime Minister illustrated how we've actually, rode back. We used to have 900 battle tanks at the end of the Cold War. We used to have 60 frigates and destroyers. We used to have 36 fast jet squadrons in the last Gulf War in 1991. We're down to 8 now. That's simply not enough to protect what's important to us as our world slides, I'm afraid, splinters potentially into two spheres of competing influence, with Russia and China on one side, the West on the other, and many of those other states, as we implied earlier, watching from the sidelines or, basically taking no part whatsoever.
And having said all that, is there any argument for NATO to get more actively involved to get this done?
What a loaded question that is. The simple answer is yes, but it is been forced to sit on its hands. It's been benched, not able to participate in this because of the veto that Turkey and Hungary possess. A year ago, we had two nations, Sweden and Finland, wanting to join. That still hasn't happened. And that shows you how the most formidable, potent military alliance the world has ever seen is unable to lean in and protect a democracy that's inside Europe as well. I think, hiding behind this idea that because Ukraine wasn't a member of NATO, that is not our fight. It is our fight. It concerns us. Putin is the most destabilising force in Europe now, affecting security, affecting all our economies. It's NATO's job to defend democracies in Europe and indeed beyond. And we need to have greater vigor, greater courage, greater determination to see that through. If we're not able to do it through NATO, then it must be a coalition of willing. There is another grouping called the Joint Expeditionary Force, with Britain leads, in fact, of 10 like-minded nations, including the Baltics. That, for me, would be the answer, and invite Ukraine to join that immediately.
And, do you think part of this, have we, has NATO been too frightened of President Putin with all his threats of, and they're serious threats, in terms of using his nuclear arsenal, et cetera, et cetera. Has NATO and has the West just been too frightened, do you think?
Oh, completely. And it started off with Afghanistan. Well, I wrote back before then. It started off with Georgia, when Abkhazia, South Ossetia were invaded. The West didn't do enough. We saw that in the Donbass, Crimea as well. Too timid to react, too timid to punish, hoping Russia might resort and return to being a global statesman. It's not happened. And you go back to 2007, that's the Munich Security Conference speech that Putin gave. He spelled out what he wanted to do, that he wanted to rekindle that sense of ownership, if you like, over the Slavic part of Europe, the former Warsaw Pact countries. It's been very clear what mission he's been on, and we've been spooked by his language. Absolutely right. We've been too timid, too risk averse. And it's the statecraft skills that we had in the Cold War that allowed us to lean in and actually set the agenda, but controlling the escalatory ladder so things didn't get out of control.
And Tobias, how does this end? I mean, you've made it very clear that you want to see it end soon. John Bolton's very clear that it's complete elimination of Russia from all parts of Ukraine. That's very much the Zelensky line. But there are others, well-respected voices and from the world of, the military. For example, Max Hastings wrote an interesting piece a while ago saying, look, this may end up in a really horrible place, which none of us want to sort of think about, but there might have to be some kind of sordid deal to make this, if this does turn into a sort of very dug-in war of attrition. I mean, how is this realistically going to play out?
So that's exactly where it could end up if we allow Russia to continue controlling the agenda. And the only way you can change that is by ensuring Ukraine is able to regain terrain. It needs to be able to punch through Russian defenses. So we're starting to give them the tanks. They need the top cover. That's where the air power then comes in to give them the advantage. We've offered air defense systems that's kept the Russian Air Force at bay. That's very good indeed. But unless we are seen, or Ukraine is seen to gain territory that will keep the West united, we can then push Russia out. And that looks like success. If we're not committed enough, this becomes a frozen conflict. Ukraine is then stuck with having lost part of its terrain. Russia can then declare some form of success, and then this drags out exactly as Max Hastings explains. So it's up to us to show greater resolve, provide the equipment that's needed immediately. So air power is fantastic. F-16s you touched on, Typhoon Tranche 1s are potential, but these are going to take months, if not years, to provide. There are other forms of air power, I stress, not just fast jets, that could allow Ukraine, give them the advantage to be able to liberate Donbass to begin with, and as I stressed, then the Crimea. Then that message goes to Russia that we will stand up. The West will support democracies that are attacked by adversaries. And that's a powerful message to China. Don't forget that's watching all this very carefully indeed, given what their interests are in their neck of the woods.
Yeah, particularly with Taiwan. And final couple of points to Tobias Ellwood. We have the budget coming up on the 15th of March. What's your ask of Ben Wallace and, of course, Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt?
Well, people like myself need to make the case, and indeed the government, I hope as well, of the synergy, and I touched on it already, between our economy, our prosperity, and our security, because they are all aligned now. You drop your guard, and because we've embraced globalization over the last couple of decades, then we're going to lose access to supply chains, lose access to our markets, and that will then affect us here. That's what happens when we don't invest in our hard power. Also, we are a country that leans in, provides solutions. We have a convening capability. Look what we did with the tanks. When we offered our tanks, others then followed suit. You can only do that if you invest in our armed forces. We've got a very difficult, bumpy decade ahead. We need to increase the defense budget, because if you don't, all budgets will be affected, because our security will deteriorate, as will our economy and our prosperity.